Beware Romulans bearing gifts.
This is Isaac.
And welcome back. Once again, it's Romulans Bearing Gifts with just me and Isaac. And this one was not completely random like last week. Truth be told, I wanted to do one of the better episodes of Enterprise. I didn't want to just choose one out of the ether, because if you do that with Enterprise, there's a fair chance you're going to pull a dud. And I didn't want to pull a dud. So I kind of went to a list. And the problem with the list was there was so many that I thought, I knew it was going to be a small cast on the podcast. And I thought, I can't pull out one of these. I don't know that banger is the right term for Enterprise episodes. So it became more difficult than it needed to be. But finally, I settled on The Andorian Incident, which is from Season 1, Episode 7.
They haven't been heard from since the original Star Trek series. Now, the Andorians are back.
Don't get your antennas in a twist.
With a vengeance.
I'll enjoy having you as a prisoner.
Enterprise, an all-new episode.
So, Isaac, how much Enterprise have you seen before now?
Nothing at all. Never even heard the theme song.
Where is Carl when we need him on the podcast?
I assume he's a big fan of the theme song.
No.
Well, I guess my initial impressions of Enterprise, I'll say, not of this episode, but of Enterprise, very hard to see how we get to the 60s from here. I don't know how we get from like here to 60s looks. But again, it's probably your interpretation of how modern Trek is supposed to evoke the 60s, but it's from our perspective nowadays.
I will remind the audience about that when I react to whatever you're saying now.
Yes, of course. But yeah, immediately the theme song was, what are we doing? Why? And why does why does the whole production look like that, like Dune television movie from the 2000s?
Oh, that's an interesting comparison. Okay, so for the audience, because I honestly cannot remember if I brought this up on this podcast before. I might have, but I don't know. But I know I brought it up more than once in offline discussions with my podcasting mates.
Many a time.
So this really came to a head for me with Strange New Worlds in particular. I mean, it was already an issue with Discovery, and you could argue the Abrams verse, the Kelvin timeline of movies. Like, how does this aesthetic make any sense in light of Star Trek? And even, when this series Enterprise was currently airing, a lot of people had that same question as you. Like, how do we get from this aesthetic to TOS? And I had wrestled with that too. And one of the things that made it difficult, if you're a canonist with Star Trek, is there's a certain episode of DS9, let's just say that they traveled to Kirk's time. And that episode was so fun when it aired because they matched the TOS aesthetic as perfectly as they can. And so that sort of canonizes that, that's what their world looked like during young Kirk's time. And because Star Trek Discovery is take it or leave it, it's whatever, like however you feel about it. So it was easy to dismiss, in my mind, it not jibing with Kirk's time or that era in Starfleet. But I'm just going to say, out of personal bias, I quite like the show Strange New Worlds a lot. And it also begins in that same time frame as Star Trek Discovery. And maybe it's just out of my adoration of that show, Strange New Worlds, that I somehow made it work for me. And the way I've explained it to my friends, and if maybe I've explained it before, or maybe you've never heard me explain it on this podcast, even if I did. So it has to do with like looking at historical films. And if you see like a movie that takes place during Roman times, or the Wild West, Cowboys and Indians, if you look at a production from, let's just say, the 1940s set in those times periods, but then you watch another movie set at the same time but from the 1970s or 2020, you notice aesthetically they can look wildly different in terms of costuming and buildings and everything else. And so, or where this really solidified for me is more directly, if anyone has seen The Right Stuff, Apollo 13, and or First Man. First movie was in the early 80s. Next movie was late 90s. And then the last one is in the late teens when it came out. And all those movies are based on a true story, historical events, real life people in the movie, portrayed. And all took place over the span of a decade or so, those three movies. But if you watch them, and they're all good movies in their own right, but if you just watch them, even though they all take place more or less in the same time period, you can really feel the aesthetic difference in the sets and the costumes and everything. But yet they all work. They're all good. They are all historical part of quote unquote Earth canon. And it's fine. And somehow that dawned on me when I was watching Apollo 13, or one of those. It was probably Apollo 13 that I watched in the last year or two. That idea really dawned on me. And ever since then, that's now how I look at Star Trek series in general. If we imagine we live in, let's say, in the time period of Starfleet where Picard is a much older man, like let's say the Picard series time frame, then we're looking into their history, into way back hundreds of years prior, whether it's Kirk or Archer's time. And so we're just seeing these imperfect historical period recreations. And so once I was able to wrap my brain around that, I don't have nearly as much issue as I used to. And I've explained this to people like Carl and Caleb, and yeah, this doesn't work for them at all. That just sounds like a bunch of nonsense. But yeah, that's what I got. But the other way to think about it is, yes, it's hard to match this with TOS aesthetic as being their future. But I presume you haven't seen Discovery before or Strange New Worlds, right?
I only just recently got Paramount Plus given to me, so that is a no.
Well, if and when you see any bits and bobs of either of those shows,
probably not.
To me, they kind of had an aesthetic similar to the Abrams Star Trek movies.
Clearly. And
not necessarily the Enterprise in those movies, but if you've seen the first one from 2009, when we see the movie begins more in the past. Have you seen Star Trek 2009?
I have.
Okay, so you know the beginning takes place in a slightly earlier time frame. That particular time frame, that earlier within those movies, I can completely connect the dots in my mind. Like, I could see how Enterprise looks. I could see it kind of morphing into that earlier time period in the Abrams movie. And then furthermore, kind of resembles Discovery and Strange New Worlds to me as well. So, yeah, it depends how you look at things. So, aesthetics aside, what else do you think about Enterprise? Because I didn't even really think about this when I chose it, that this could possibly be your first time watching this series.
Well, I've heard this is the not fifth, but this is the fourth consecutive series, I guess, from once, because is it Voyager that bleeds? Because each series kind of bleeds into each other, right?
No, there's two that cross over a little bit. Yes. When DS9 started, its first two seasons, I believe, overlapped with the final two of TNG. And then Voyager, after they ended TNG, obviously DS9 is still going with their season 3. But if there would have been a season 8 of TNG, instead that would be like season 1 Voyager. I can't remember if it was a 1 year or 2 year break, but Voyager picks up almost after, not picks up, but starts airing almost right after TNG ends. So you have a little bit of overlap of TNG and DS9, and then DS9 and Voyager. And, mild spoiler, but DS9 in its premiere episode uses TNG a little bit as a springboard, and then Voyager does the same thing. When it premieres, it uses DS9 a little bit as a springboard.
Well, they're all part of the same stardate, aren't they?
Well, yeah, yes, obviously, yes.
Well, I don't see a problem with that. That's not a spoiler.
Oh, yeah, I don't think it's a problem. Oh, it's just a spoiler if you hadn't seen the premiere episodes and you didn't realize you'd get to a little bit of the other show. But also that practice of using the previous show as a springboard for a spinoff, that was extremely common practice prior throughout the history of American television. So, yeah, it only made sense in a way.
But I guess this is the first prequel, I suppose. Well, okay, I gotta be careful how I say that, because we're not including time-traveling shenanigans in TOS or any other series, but...
Oh, yeah, of course. There's definitely episodes, in the earlier series, all of them, that involve some version of time travel or seeing previous times. But no, this is the first one that is entirely set in an earlier period that we've almost never seen in this universe, Star Trek universe.
And, well, this is 2001. So, again, those who are crossovers, those fans, who do tend to go outside of just Star Trek, how many comparisons to the Star Wars prequels were there?
Not a lot, really.
Surprising.
Not that I recall.
Very impressive.
Well, I guess. But there was still a fair amount of fan grumblings about certain things. And we've discussed Enterprise before on this podcast quite a few times. And Carl is one of the torchbearers for disliking Enterprise in general.
Oh, and that came out of nowhere. Okay, I thought he would be the one. That was not the words that I thought you would have said.
It's not that he hates the show outright, but he definitely is of popular opinion that this felt like the dying days of TV Trek, where it was starting to overstay its welcome. That really started at Voyager, and they try to reset with Enterprise because they could already tell what was happening with the reception of Voyager, and this did not work out the way they wanted it to, because it turned out eventually being less well received than Voyager. And anyway, when we've done this show before on this podcast, I've been constantly derided by Kat and Carl because both of them really dislike this series in general. They accept it because it's Trek, but they have issues. And I think Caleb's not a fan either, but I don't think he dislikes it as much as Kat and Carl.
I not to obviously speak for my friend, but if I could interject, Caleb, I apologize. But if I can use a similar word to that I've been using and throwing around for a certain prequel series, I'll also give perhaps Caleb is ambivalent to this series.
Okay. And for myself, Kat and Carl love to accuse me of just being like this lover of Enterprise, like it's practically my favorite Star Trek series. But that is a mischaracterization. this is kind of like what's been brought up many times on other podcasts I'm involved in. This is what everybody tries to do with me with the movie Skyline. They like to treat it as if I had said on a podcast that it was like one of my all-time favorite sci-fi movies of the late aughts, early teens. But that's a mischaracterization, grossly, of my original opinion that I stated on a podcast years ago. Same thing happens with The Exorcist 2, The Heretic. People treat me as if I started the fan club of loving that movie. But with Skyline and Exorcist and Enterprise, it's not because I love them in a fanboy kind of way. It's just they're fine in their own way, even though they're not my favorites of the different IPs they represent. But I like them for what they are. And each of those things, Skyline and Heretic and Enterprise, has its own charm, each in their own individual way. Each has its charms for me. So I certainly don't hate these things or Enterprise. But it's not like my favorite thing. Like, oh, I'm just this champion of the Enterprise series. I just adore it. No. That's not the truth. But I just want to clarify that.
Complete and utter apologies from me, ladies and gentlemen, those in between unaffiliated regulation listeners and comment leavers. My apologies that we're spending the first 15 minutes, discussing stuff that you all already know.
No, it's okay. It's an okay refresher.
Just because, I'm the new scrub here, so it's...
Yeah, we do this anytime, whether we're doing the Doctor Who podcast or this or the movie podcast. Anybody who comes in and hasn't seen that particular show or that version of the series, it's to be expected.
I don't know if there's a new bingo card game that y'all have somewhere on some subreddit where it's just it's a new scrub to Star Trek. Let's see, get your bingo cards out and see if he's gonna, you'll get who's the first to get a bingo or black out the entire bingo card.
Well, you're practically the first new scrub, except for ages ago, early on in this podcast when we had Tom on a few times. Although Tom is familiar with Star Trek, it was more the older stuff. So other than Tom, we've never really had any type of Star Trek noob until you. Oh, except for Josh. But Josh isn't a noob. He's just an extremely casual fan of Star Trek, I guess. But anyway.
Well, it's just the card. I mean, is supposed to is probably they're gonna have all the same pitfalls. They're gonna realize all the same things that every fan eventually realizes, and as they watch this stuff, they'll be like, "Oh no, yeah, same thing." They immediately don't like this. They immediately catch on to this or something. Something like that. It's a game of meta. So it's they'll realize, he's gonna just basically become one of us eventually, or at least he's on his way to becoming one of us.
I see what you're saying. And yes, just on the theme song alone, yeah, I don't know what the ratio is, 80-20, 70-30. People either love it or hate it.
Yeah, listen, I don't know if they were Paramount was like, hey, we need more Aerosmith Don't Want to Miss a Thing from Armageddon, so let's get, at home Temu version of that.
Yeah, it's definitely that kind of song, and it's a singer, I can't remember who the singer is, but he's like a sound-alike to Rod Stewart type singer. But I like the theme song. I especially liked, more than the theme song, I liked the visuals during the opening.
Yeah, I'll give it that. I will give you that. I think the visuals are this is interesting. I like that, where we kind of start with from star charts to, the spaceship and to, the Enterprise like that. No, that's cool. I'll agree with you on that.
Yeah, but I always quite liked it. And I've said this before also on the podcast. It's because the DS9 opening always felt a little bit too static and placid for me. And then with the Voyager opening, they kind of doubled down on that. And so I was getting over that aesthetic. So I almost wanted anything other than that again. And I guess that's part of the reason why I've always been more open compared to others on the Enterprise opening. So what do you make of this crew? And what do you make of this time period? Like, in your head, do you even know approximately how many years prior this is to other Star Trek we've seen?
Do you want me to like give an honest answer, or what the episode, or not episode, but what like the series briefly says in its like paragraph on Paramount Plus?
You can just give your personal.
Well, this is hard because I'm obviously influenced by what Paramount Plus says and what I've also been told by friends of the series, or of Star Trek fans. But as far as I'm aware, this is a prequel that is set many star cycles before Kirk's time period in TOS. And again, I still wonder, like, how the heck did we get to TOS with, like, everything there? Pardon me. But with a lot, like, colorful, but a lot more muted, which is fine. It's not like, I don't know, was it like Batman versus Superman muted colors? But I'm like, okay, I guess, like, we start, we're trying to gradually go from, it's an in-between the astronauts of the 60s to when we eventually get to, I don't even know if you want to call it astronauts, but like, the Starfleet of the whatever TOS time period is. So it's like, okay, I can see where it's going from. But yeah, set many, like a time quite prior to, I don't know, like 300 years or something like that before TOS, but I don't know when his first contact happens.
About 100.
Okay. Interesting. So I assume that Discovery mentions Enterprise because that's a prequel, so they're going to have to be in line, right?
Well, what's weird is the Star Trek that has come out since 2009, whether on film or on television streaming, it is remarkable how much Archer's name gets mentioned. Quite a lot in a lot of the new Trek post 2009.
Yes, retroactively, almost like they intended for that to happen.
Have you seen Star Trek Beyond?
Good movie. I liked it. I have opinions.
So you know the ship that they sort of get running again off the planet?
Yeah, wasn't that based off of Justin Lin's dad? Like he named it in memory, not memory, but named it in honor of his dad?
That could be, I don't remember. But aesthetically, that ship is meant to be of this time period.
And yeah, I'm not obviously the geek or nerd, whatever you want to call it, who knows all the designation class ships. I don't know what they were looking like, prior to TOS time period ships. So I again, at least from what, the introduction of Enterprise was looking like, I'm like, okay, we're getting the saucer. We'll get to TOS's saucer eventually, but it's gradual, but it definitely does look like the early aughts version of the saucer design.
Yeah. So, and I remember another thing now that was controversial at the time this show came out about these details of how is this supposed to be pre-TOS history. There's many to choose from,
of course,
but one that I remember sticks out is just the fact that the rank system on the uniforms was a pip style. It's referred to as pips in TNG, the circular little dots. And here they're little squares, but let's just call it the pip system because it's still, and that in of itself was such a fan argument debate. Like, why are they using the TNG system prior to TOS and the Star Trek movies? And of course, there's a million ways to explain that if we take this all as canon, but it's just insane the amount of conversations people had about that.
Yeah, let's not get pedantic. Let's get to the meat of the whole argument because I would like to talk about this episode. But as for the crew, kind of smaller than I thought. Very like.
You mean like the number of people?
Are you talking? Yeah, number of people wise. In this episode, if we're just going by, the people like in this episode, very small number. There's the captain, his I assume number one next to him, then the science officer. I don't know if there's a medical officer somewhere, and there's, I guess, the red shirt guy, person who beams him down, and then information guy.
Who's the information guy?
I think he's a science officer, if I recall. He's bald. I think. Or maybe has hair. I can't remember.
Bald.
Yeah. He's in the conversation back on the Enterprise while everybody else is down there. Not while everybody else is down there, but it's the guy who then, the reinforcement guy who comes as part. Yes. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, those between an affiliate. Again, I don't know all the names of these people.
Okay, so that's Malcolm. He's not bald.
Okay.
He has a British accent, sort of.
Not him, the other guy.
Oh, who's the other one who's in the assault?
He's not on the assault. He's still aboard the Enterprise, and he's talking with like the, I guess, engineer lady.
I need to look because I cannot remember who this individual is.
Of course.
The information guy, as you call him.
I guess I also wonder what the science officer, she's Klingon. Pardon me. No, she's Vulcan. What is she wearing exactly? What is that? Is it like traditional Vulcan garb? That's not supposed to be...
Not traditional, but I guess it's more of a Vulcan casual professional wear. Because no, traditional Vulcan clothing does not look quite like that.
Okay.
In Star Trek. It's some sort of like, maybe the Vulcan equivalent of like a pantsuit. Like, upper business casual.
Not too formal.
Right. But not their regular clothing.
I see what you mean by their rank system, but...
Yeah.
I'm not...
I don't know who was on the ship during the... I don't know who you're talking about.
Okay, let me see here. So he's an engineer, excuse me. He's got short hair, and if you go to like, I'm on Paramount Plus, so if you go to like...
So he beams down on...
Nope. So if you go to the timestamp 1740,
1740,
there's a clear shot of him, and then, which again, maybe he's just a, he got lines, so I'm assuming he's a main character. Guess he's an ensign. I'm not really too sure. I don't know I don't know all like the terminology and nomenclature for these guys. Yeah, he's got short hair and he's an engineer.
He's sitting in the chair.
Yep.
He's the one who goes down on the assault.
The black guy.
Oh, the black guy.
I really did not want to use color, but yeah, the black guy.
Well, it helps.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
No, it does help.
It's just a guy, anyway.
No.
Is this fellow, regardless of skin color, is this fellow a main character?
Yes, he is. Interesting to call him the information guy. I never would have thought of him as the information guy, although I know he serves that purpose, in some of these scenes of dialogue in this episode. But yeah, he's a young helmsman.
Okay.
So he's basically like a or the pilot. Malcolm, of course, who goes down the assault, is chief of security.
Yep.
The one who I think you referred to as like the number one to Captain Archer is not the number one.
Okay.
I think you're referring to Trip, who has sort of like the southern country accent.
That or he's from Minnesota.
He's not from Minnesota. I think his family in the show, his character, I think they come from Florida.
Oh, that's a Florida accent? Okay.
Maybe if you're in the panhandle of Florida.
Oh, okay.
Certainly possible. People who live and come from the panhandle of Florida is like a totally different culture compared to the rest of the peninsula. Because those who live in the panhandle, it's kind of a southern United States vibe, akin to neighboring Georgia. But anyway, so he's the chief or head engineer.
Oh, okay. He's a Scotty.
And he's also Archer's best bud, kind of like Bones, I guess.
I kind of got that feeling from them. They had a good chemistry with each other.
Yeah. And then T'Pol, the Vulcan, she is the first officer, and I believe the science officer as well. I know it sounds like Spock, but yes, there's that. And who else do we have? We have, oh my gosh, I was going to call her Yoshi, but it's Hoshi.
Character played by Linda Park.
Yes. She's a communications officer.
I see.
And I think that's all. Oh, the doctor. You did meet the doctor. You just didn't know it was the doctor because he wasn't.
Is he the guy who eats a stick of celery?
Yes. He's the doctor, Dr. Flops.
That voice sounded so familiar, but I'm like, I don't know who that is.
He's played a lot of roles.
Character actor.
Yes, he is a character actor in movies and other television. But what's weird is when he's not playing the alien he is in Star Trek, I get his roles in other media outside of Star Trek confused with the actor who plays Neelix in Star Trek Voyager, because both of them are character actors outside of Star Trek.
Yeah, similar makeup design.
And even though the men are different, I get their non-Star Trek work mixed together. But yeah, he's the Doctor. So yeah, there you go.
Thank you. I'll remember none of these people.
Well, I'm sure we'll watch Enterprise again eventually.
Of course. I'm not trying to flush them out of my mind. It's just like it'll take me a while.
Oh, understood.
Let's just say that the cultural osmosis is mostly surrounding TNG and maybe TOS.
Oh, maybe TOS. That's an understatement, but yeah, okay.
Obviously, Deep Space Nine. There's I don't know about much of Voyager, but this is like
yeah, in the zeitgeist, it's TOS, TNG all day, and then you get like a bit of a drop off of recognition with DS9.
What's Voyager?
And then more drop off with Voyager, and then even more drop off with this. And don't even get me started with Discovery, because that is the biggest cultural drop off ever. It's sort of almost a discussion meme on this podcast that me, Kat, and Carl basically watched every episode of Discovery, and we can never name more than 3.5 regular crew members. Outside of 3.5, even though we see those other background crew members throughout the series, we can never, ever remember any of the other names. And that's a weird testament to that show. And Kat loves that show, by the way. And she can't remember the names.
If you'll permit me, of course. While I shouldn't be bringing it up, because it's probably sacrilege to many. It's a discussion you and I have had before. I don't know if it was on recording or not, but it's this, again, just to use it as an analogy, it's similar to the sequel trilogy of Star Wars in the Disney era. Can anybody remember everybody's name or, memorability, excuse me. And then I go back to episode 3, hello there, General Kenobi, and a whole generation of people know what I'm talking about.
Wait, hold on. I feel like I didn't understand half of what you just put down. Say that again.
I'm referring to memes, of course. It is memes itself. I'm not talking just like, the jokes. I'm literally talking about I will hunt that man down one day and, defile his court. No, of course not. What Richard Dawkins refers to as with memes.
Okay.
If they can be continued and passed down through generations, then they will, still have prevalence. And if the characters in such of these shows do not have a similar prevalence, then, they will cease to be, and they will thus be forgotten. Hence why you got to write them down on a piece of paper.
Yeah. But like I said, anecdotally, a month or so ago, I had mentioned the name Poe Dameron to a bunch of students who were 10th grade.
Who?
Thereabouts. Oh, no, I'm sorry. They were 6th graders.
Who?
Exactly. They had no idea what I was talking about. I said, the guy who was a pilot in the new Star Wars movies?
No.
Crickets. But anyway.
Going to be 10 years old.
True, but...
Anyways, sorry. Back to the episode at hand. My apologies.
So, what do you think about the dynamic here? What do you think? I mean, there's a lot of questions I can ask you, and choose whatever you want in whatever particular order, but the vibe of Archer as a captain, the relationship between the 3 primary species in this story. What do you want to react to?
Well, it's funny how you picked an episode where Archer's the punching bag for the episode.
Explain.
He gets beat up a lot by the Andorians.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you meant metaphorically or...
Well, you could say metaphorically or physically. I'm not really too sure in this case.
Why do you think that's funny?
I don't know, just like I'm not too sure if people like beat up on Archer or kind of like, just think of him as less of a good captain. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's just
I think what they were going for, and it's not just this episode, it's the whole series. So, part of the pitch, like selling this to the public, the fans, when it came out, was, and part of the purpose of making it a prequel is, and this is what they were trying to do with Voyager but failed, and so tried again with Enterprise, is they wanted to recapture elements of TOS and what made TOS TOS. So with Voyager and again with Enterprise, they tried with the, a single ship kind of out there far away from other help and assistance of the Federation or Starfleet. Okay, we got that element. But then the other element that they injected into Enterprise that, of course, wasn't in Voyager was how physical fisticuffs were so much more a thing in TOS and 60s television in general. And so that was part of the intent, I guess you could say, behind this show. Not to have Archer beat up, but to have more for the 23rd century would be considered more archaic, ancient kind of behavior.
barbarism.
Yeah. So I think that's part of that. But no, he's not always the punching bag, but just having more fisticuffs, because Kirk would get beat up all the time in episodes physically.
Yeah, but maybe I could go back to TOS. I'll give it that. It's been some time since I've seen an episode, but I don't remember it being like, I don't know, it felt like it was taking its time with this. Like, just scenes were there of him getting like, beat up quite intentionally, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just like...
There's definitely episodes of TNG where characters get tortured when they're taken prisoner, but not usually tortured in the old-fashioned physical way. Usually with some type of device or some type of psychological thing.
At no point did I believe that these the sect of religious, or at least secular but still meditative monks, or Vulcan monks, excuse me, did I think that they had any technology with them, and that obviously should have immediately been a red flag of like, nope, they have it somewhere. It's like, oh, what could it be? And so the end bit of like, oh, they got a whole like surveillance state underneath that's probing the Andorian system. It's like, I didn't suspect at all.
Yeah, that's a funny thing. I mean, just to think about. So again, this is what I kind of started to not like about TV Trek once we got to the latter years of the run, of the continuous run of having some Star Trek television being aired every year. So in the TNG days, which obviously we just saw for last week's episode, sometimes the tells would be really obvious. Even if you didn't know exactly what the explanation would be, you could usually tell the camouflaged evildoer in advance. And that worked fine and well in TNG and to a degree in DS9. But because, you see, and tell me if this was already obvious to you before me even saying it, but Star Trek, during its run from 87 to 2006, whatever it was, where they were continuously airing new stuff every year, even though the visual aesthetic and maybe the writing style evolved to a degree over that span of time, the acting and the characterizations more or less felt unified in this television world. But what happened is it kind of more or less stayed along the same lines from 87 onward. But while Star Trek was doing its thing on television, the rest of television outside of Star Trek was evolving and changing with the times. And the closer we get to 2006 and the end of New Trek on television, the more and more the contrast was becoming so obvious that the acting style and presentation of Star Trek was starting to feel really old-fashioned compared to other television at the same time. And that's how I kind of see things like what you were describing, with how you could tell like the Vulcans don't seem right from the beginning, because this kind of subterfuge would work in the late 80s on television. It just doesn't fly in the early 2000s to what people are used to seeing by that point, if that makes sense. But had you noticed or ever thought about that before? How Star Trek television in the 90s, etc., it was almost becoming like a time capsule compared to other television?
No, seeing as how I wasn't present for the series airing.
No, I know, but you may be familiar with other popular things that came out in the late 90s and into the 2000s. Okay, listeners and longtime fans, they've heard what I'm about to say a million times before, not just from me, but they just know it as longtime Star Trek fans. So it's well known in Star Trek fan circles that Ronald D. Moore was an assistant producer on DS9. He wasn't there for like season 1 or 2, or if he was there, he wasn't prominent behind the scenes, but he became prominent approximately season 3 to the end of DS9. And many consider the writing on those latter seasons of DS9 as the best period in time of writing on TV Trek during this span. And because things started to get a bit darker, there started to be more drama, it started digging even deeper into backstories of their characters. TNG started, but then they did more so in DS9. The moral line of the Federation, Starfleet always being perfect, started to get blurred during that time on DS9. And so that's part of the reason people love DS9, why there's certain Star Trek fans who that's their hardcore favorite. So Ron D. Moore, he basically was guiding DS9 till its end. But then after DS9, he was no longer working with like Star Trek, like Voyager or this show Enterprise. But he went on to create his own sci-fi show after his successes on DS9. And he made a thing called Battlestar Galactica. And that series redefined what television sci-fi would be. And most, especially space sci-fi in particular, that to this day kind of got started with their style of space sci-fi storytelling from BSG. So it started in DS9, but then he made BSG. And BSG was running at the same time as this show. And I think that's one of the things that hurt Enterprise more than anything, because I don't even know if you've watched BSG, but it feels incredibly more modern and up to date with the times. And then you watch Enterprise and you just be like, what am I watching? Like, this is so 10, 15 years ago, like style of television. And so, yeah, that's a big thing. And I think that's a big part of the reason why Enterprise never really took off, because BSG was just sitting there. And if you were a sci-fi fan in general, it just felt incredibly more modern and pertinent to the times that they were both out and about.
So they have, when they go into the catacombs, they do set up this one stairwell, or at least entranceway, that leads down to the Requiem, the antiques, where they store all of their precious materials and items that are sacred to them. Obviously, that's a setup for something, and I'm like, how are we going to go there? But again, yeah, I had no idea there was going to be a whole, like, secret operation, like Hogan's Heroes going on underground.
A sort of new thought that occurred to me. And by the way, I saw this when it first aired, this episode, and I don't think I ever saw it again until now. And a thought occurred to me. So Vulcans in Star Trek, way before Enterprise, going back to TOS times, they have often been compared to like elves in Middle Earth or in fantasy in general. Like characteristics about their race and everything and their relationship with humans is much like elves to humans, like in fantasy lore. But in this particular episode with the Andorians, so Andorians existed certainly in TOS, and we see them a little bit in the movies as background characters. But they never really dug in to the alien race or species and their culture, not very much until Enterprise. And seeing the interactions of the three species in this episode, it kind of reminded me of elves and dwarves and humans in Middle Earth interacting with each other. What do you think?
I can see it. If the elves' magic in this case is their surveillance technology that they have by the end of it, because if we have the same definitions of dwarves in the tropes or whatever, I see dwarves as being very tech based because they have minds, so they're more industrialized potentially, or they can go into industry. Elves, prefer the more contemporary settings. They have their bows, of course. They have technology, don't get me wrong, but it's a means to an end, whereas, again, maybe as stereotypical as this may be, for dwarves, they more center around have technology as, oh yes, let's be industrial. Now, the cool thing, if you wanted to do, is you have a dwarf who is wants to be more like an elf, and you have an elf who wants to be more like a dwarf. But we're not doing that now. We're not doing that story. That's something else completely. So I assume you mean that, in this case, the Vulcans in this story, they're, again, being similar to the elves, where they're a little more reserved in their...
It's not only that, it's also how the elves are portrayed in fantasy often as...
holier than thou.
Yes. Like the most enlightened of the different races. The Vulcans heavily give off that vibe, but especially in Enterprise, even more so than the other Star Trek series.
And then the Andorians are the dwarves in this case. I didn't really get that in this episode, other than them just being nasty.
I'm not saying they're actually have may or may not have the characteristics of dwarves in fantasy, but their relationship with the Vulcans, aka elves, the way they do not get along reminds me very much of the interactions of dwarves and elves in fantasy.
Oh, yeah, I suppose so.
And then, of course, humans are kind of somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I suppose so. I just thought of the Andorians again, maybe because, basic hairless ape brain, troglodyte brain. I just, these Andorians are being pretty brutish and okay, they're very insistent. It's like, hey, what the, you guys are really onto something.
Yeah, and dwarves may be very technological and into industry, but their attitudes can be brutish.
Yeah, we gotta cite your sources. I'm only thinking of Gimli, and I don't know, he was, blunt, I suppose, but there was something endearing about him.
Yeah, when you get to know him. And I mean, that's an allusion to all types of racial relations, because when you're not familiar with the other culture, you just notice the stark differences. But it can kind of work with any culture, not just dwarves. But if you actually get to know the culture, then they start to become humanized, and that's of course what happens in the relationship between Gimli and Legolas.
Just because he was on screen briefly, sorry I don't want to change the subject.
No,
but just
ahead.
to quickly interject and go off on a tangent, the Malcolm guy, I guess the security officer,
Yes.
yeah, the British guy, whatever. At home version of Cillian Murphy.
I'll have to think about that.
They just have similar looking features. Anyway, back to what you said. Yeah, I didn't really. Yeah, I don't know. So I got a very like sour taste in my mouth from these Andorians. Like, okay, they were proven right in the end, but I don't know. Even that. I'm really sure. I don't have a good read on any of these characters so far. I know Vulcans.
They come across as the based on how they are in Enterprise, or especially this episode in particular, they kind of come across as like the species who's been kicked around a lot in the past. That's kind of how they come off to me. So they do have like a chip on their shoulder in all these interactions with other peoples. Oh, and speaking of industry, I didn't think of this until just now. So this is more if you read like Star Trek novels or get into the lore, because they don't talk about it as much on screen at all in any Star Trek, whether it's television or in movies. But if you go into the lore, quote unquote, or read novels, you will learn that Andorians were considered one of the best species or races at producing and designing starships. So that's like their thing within the Federation, you know. I'm trying to think the equivalents in other IPs. The calamari in Star Wars,
Or the Corellians.
yeah, also are that way. But Andorians in the lore, yeah, their designs of ships like lent a lot to how like the Federation ships evolved and stuff like that. Yeah, they are like a cross between the calamari and the Corellian in the Star Wars universe. Yeah, that's kind of how they are in Star Trek. So I guess that makes them more like dwarves as well. That hadn't occurred to me until just now.
I mean, it also could just be like going back to Godzilla, the Earth trilogy, which again only me and Caleb are fans of. It's like the Bill Saluto and what were the other guys called? Metphys. I remember his name, Metphys. I listened to this a while ago.
Which one was which in the Godzilla? Which ones were the blue ones?
You mean the analogy in this case, right? The Bill Saluto would have probably been the Andorians.
No, in Godzilla, which ones were called? What was the name of the blue ones?
I don't know if they were blue necessarily, but there was the Bill Saluto, and then there was the Exif. That's what it was, the Exif.
Or were they tan?
They're, I don't know, brown, I guess. I'm not really sure.
Yeah. Maybe it's because they have blue eyes or white hair or something, but they weirdly give me an Andorian vibe, even though it's not a one-for-one in any way. Wow, I just saw the scene where the Andorian punched Archer in the kidney, right in the kidney. It's crazy. It's weird to watch. And the character, the Andorian, the one who's most prominent, who has the most lines, that actor in of himself is a big time fan favorite throughout 90s Trek. He was known for playing all different types of aliens throughout 90s Trek, but people really like his fandom started to grow because of a reoccurring character he played in D Space Nine, and then later this character, this is his first appearance in Enterprise, but he would return often, and so he very much.
Okay, so I definitely want to watch that one next because I'm now interested.
Yeah, he becomes a mainstay, and like I said, he's one of the most beloved character / alien actors throughout all the 90s, 2000s Trek.
So Lone Suitor done right. Got it.
Yeah. So yeah. I'm sorry, I can't even think of the actor's name right now, but most other fans.
Jeffrey Combs, aka The Question, aka was it Dr. Moreau or no Mordred? I don't remember.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be Doctor Strange, but they changed it at last minute.
Yeah. I wish Caleb were here. I know he wanted to be, just because I know Caleb had a lot of critical things to say about Archer. And I can only vaguely imagine what types of things Caleb would bring up. But what do you think, personally, about, what you've gathered from what episode, about this Captain Archer?
Well, he's not a womanizer, not that I can see yet. But he still has the morals of he's not willing to let any of these priests get beheaded, obviously. But he is a little fast and loose at the very end, though, with, like, take a scan right in front of some of the monks' faces and say, like, here, you can have your data and get out of here. And so, like, he's basically just done by that point. He's fed up. He's like, enough is enough. Like, let's kind of end this. And he's willing to spill the beans on the entire operation. So not a maverick necessarily, but pushed to his wit's end and being like, all right, like this, the secrecy and this spy needs to stop.
Yeah, I think others would agree. I think the way they tried to portray Archer throughout the show was, yeah, a bit of a maverick, a bit of a cowboy, so to speak, like kind of frontier justice. Again, they're supposed to be, because of distance, fairly isolated from Starfleet and the Federation. The Enterprise...
Well, he's no Malcolm Reynolds.
Right. When they're on their missions. And I get it, and I'm okay with it, with them trying for that. And the problem is, and even though I like Archer myself, it can be difficult because what he actually reminds me of more than a cowboy maverick, and maybe this is just me, it reminds me of when I read X-Men comics and how they would portray Cyclops as this reluctant leader, always doubting himself as the role as leader of the X-Men. Now, it's not that Archer seems to doubt that he should be the captain, but I have always got a vibe of he seems the least self-assured compared to other Star Trek captains. And I always find it's hard for me to describe it or put my finger on it because it's not overt self-doubt, but it always feels like Archer is struggling with things that have to do with his job and running the ship, like internally struggling. And someone who takes this way too far, who embodies this, is the captain in Discovery. My gosh, I can't even think of her character. Oh my god, what is it with Discovery? I can't even. Oh, Michael Burnham. Oh my gosh, Michael Burnham is the captain in Discovery. She takes that to a whole different level of inner strife and struggle. But yeah, I see lesser amounts of it, but still present in Archer. And I don't know why he comes across like that. I mean, I have to assume it's part of how they designed him to be, but why? Don't know. And it doesn't help the show when you watch the show as a whole, because you don't. I think you don't like the feeling of feeling like your captain isn't completely in command of all situations, the way other traditional Star Trek captains come off. I don't know if you saw any of that in this one episode or have any thoughts on that.
I mean, this is an opinion you've had for quite some time. You've been this is like stuck with you for almost 20 years now, excuse me. So I like the read on it. I agree with you. It's almost there's a reluctance there, as some people point out, between the original, the Cecil B. DeMille Moses from the Ten Commandments versus the Prince of Egypt Moses, where one is Charlton Heston, the other's Val Kilmer as voice, and kind of unsure of the position he's in. The other's, like I said, Charlton Heston, the Superman versus the Everyman. So grounding this character instead, like we tried to, the writers grounded Picard in the last episode. This one, they definitely make him as kind of not flying by the seat of his pants. He's not Han Solo, and like I said, he's not Malcolm Reynolds. If you were Malcolm Reynolds, he'd shoot, he'd make sure that there'd be I say bullet, but the phasers would be set to kill or lethal or whatever you want to call it by the end.
It's funny. I mean, that is definitely a character trait of that character. It's kind of crazy.
Of Archer, of Mal?
No, Malcolm.
Oh, Mal. Okay.
Shoot first, ask questions later.
Well, I'm just more thinking of the very end of the pilot, but that's just me.
Yeah, no, that's just the way he is. Oftentimes, it's funny, but yeah, and I guess that was part of the purpose, because technically speaking, in Star Trek lore, Archer's supposed to be sort of the first long distance spacefaring starship captain in Starfleet history. So you don't have to, but there's going to be some degree of him being flawed. Oh, I'm sorry. It's funny. I completely forgot, but there's that big round rolling door in the monastery.
Yep.
I didn't even realize it has an X on it, and it opens. Oh, it doesn't roll in the X-Men movies. It separates in the middle.
Yeah, it opens in a way, yeah, for Cerebro.
But there's literally an X right in the center of this door. That's kind of
and weird. Who's Captain? Okay, it's funny, the idea of like inventing the medium. Like obviously TOS was maybe not inventing, but it definitely started that medium off of like here's the rules of this universe. So it's kind of a weird thing to do prequels in this manner of like here's the okay. Don't worry, I'm not like trying to go against this show, but it is weird to like you have to do the medium, almost go be like before the medium is created. So
right.
I can see the limitations there and why people wouldn't immediately latch on to this. But yeah, possibly over time it got like you said, you kind of were won over it. Well, I don't know. Were you won over it immediately, or did it take like time?
I liked it just because I was so over Voyager, and I just wanted anything that wasn't Voyager.
Okay.
That was my initial thing. And then, like many other people, of course, I was in love with T'Pol from episode 1. Her wig gets better later.
Oh, the science officer. Okay.
Not great. Yes. So I would just show up, if for nothing else, to watch T'Pol every week. I always wanted to know what was going on with her character in the show, etc. But as Carl has stated numerous times, a common theme with all the Trek shows, except for TOS, and obviously we're not talking about Paramount Plus, they all seem pretty rocky in their first 2 seasons, especially. All of them. And Enterprise was no different in the first 2 seasons, give or take. But I noticed a marked improvement in season 3. And then something they did in almost the entire season 4, which was new for Star Trek. And maybe it was because of BSG, because BSG was, serialized much more than traditional standalone episodic. And so in the final season of Enterprise, they started doing like Clone Wars series and other series where they started doing 2 and 3 episode mini arcs. And so they were still standalones, but they would definitely be connective tissue for 2 or 3 episodes in a row. And I just felt the writing improved in 3rd season and got much, much better in the 4th season. And it felt like the show was finally becoming the show, and then boom, it got canceled.
So it might be a stretch. Maybe Caleb will get this. Maybe this is an obvious observation, but with the Andorians and just with like the Jeffrey Combs connection as well. And again, maybe I don't know what the Andorians looked like in previous series before with the antennae, but with Jeffrey Combs especially, because I've seen it. Just with the way the good effect does look a little like weird, but I got used to it. Even antennae don't work like that, but anyway, I was getting From Beyond vibes with how that movie operates.
Wait, what in particular in Beyond?
It's just From Beyond, like the movie called From Beyond.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
It's it's kind of a like Lovecraftian story, it's interesting. And let's just say there's a certain protruding antennae that appears out of Jeffrey Combs' forehead in the film.
Okay.
Yeah, if you'll see it, you know what I mean. So I'm like, oh, maybe that's why they brought Jeffrey Combs in here.
I don't know. But the Andorians largely have looked the same for the most part since TOS. They've changed a bit, but more or less the same visual rules. I do kind of like the way they look in the Paramount Plus era, though, I will say. Although, in the Paramount Plus era, and generally speaking, the revisions of alien races that are returning to screen, in general, I would say the Paramount Plus versions look like the evil versions or the more sinister, even if they're not evil characters, just aesthetically they look more sinister, whether it's Ferengi, Klingon, these guys, Andorians. There's this other species that's associated with the early days of Star Trek, the Tellarites. You see them all eventually in Paramount Plus world, but they all just look a bit more sinister. I don't know why that is. And in Paramount Plus Trek world, the Andorians, I think they have more CGI antennae, and so there's a lot more gestures out of their antennae in modern Trek.
One thing I did like, though, that does really work as a prequel, was the fact that I don't know when transportation was a thing. I definitely like the fact that when they're going to beam them down, there's hesitation by that one red shirt or one of the guys, one of the landing party, of just like, are you sure we're going to be doing this? And so that, at least in that instance, I was pleased with it. That was a thing that we had and brought in and thought of for the sake of the prequel.
Yeah. Another thing that me and Carl have harped on numerous times when we talk about Enterprise. Again, when it was sold to us before it came out, and they're talking about it's the early days, it's the frontier of space. They don't have all the technology, that we're used to in Star Trek. They don't have food replicators. They don't have phasers and photon torpedoes and transporters and even shields as they're understood in Star Trek. But in the first season, it's almost like every episode they're testing out the new technology so that by the time we get to the end of season 1, we pretty much got it all. And it was just kind of like, what? So why would you sell it as we don't have it? But now we've got it all. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just a bit of a conundrum.
Now that you say this is like kind of the starter of, especially when the lead, I forget his name, like Combs's character, I don't know his name, I forgot his name. Especially if you say that this is kind of like his introduction, especially when he says at the end, "We're in your debt," and that should have been an indication. Now I'm interested. Now this is kind of like because what I hesitate over of like, see, this feels like a good pilot, almost like this feels like we should start like, we created a snowball and now I want to see it roll down the mountain, because this feels like a plot that could, not go on for a season, but at least can go on for a few episodes. And I'd like to see maybe what is the follow-up? What happens? Okay, it's not going to immediately be follow-up afterwards, but is there going to be now, are the tensions between the Vulcans and the Andorians going to heighten now? Are they going to now be at each other's throats more?
Well, only time will tell.
Exactly.
Or maybe there's a certain significant episode from TOS that can answer that question as well.
Oh, that is true.
Oh, what was I going to say to that? What you just said. What's cool is that, that's cool that kind of hooks you in as a new viewer to the show. But what's cool is that way back in TOS, there was at least a few characters that got to return and kind of continue what had been established. And it's kind of cool because there's not many of them in TOS, but there's some, and they're memorable. These certain few characters who popped up more than once throughout the run of the show. Yeah. I was almost going to pick another episode from Enterprise that gets more into that subject, but I chose this one instead.
I'll put it on the list.
Yeah. But, glad you liked it. I was going to say something else about Enterprise. Oh, you said this could have been a pilot. It could have. But I really like the pilot of Enterprise, the actual pilot. It was probably one of my favorites of this era of Trek and pilots. I really liked the first DS9 as well when it came out, but I was really in love with the pilot of this one. It's just the rest of the episodes generally in season 1 of Enterprise were not nearly as good as the pilot. So it was kind of like a letdown in that first year. Oh, and were you familiar, because we already covered it on this podcast, were you familiar with the, there's sort of like, do you know there's sort of a WWE episode of Voyager and then one of Enterprise?
No, I think I heard something about an Enterprise, maybe, or maybe it was in Voyager. Is it Stone Cold or is it somebody else?
It's not Stone Cold.
Or is it Dwayne?
I can't remember. I think it's Dwayne, I think, in Voyager. But in Enterprise, it was the first episode, I believe, that I chose for this podcast. I mean, that was my choice.
Yes.
And I think it's the first Enterprise episode we covered on this podcast. And it's The Big Show plays an alien race that is known in Star Trek world. But he's essentially an arena fighter in the episode that he features in. And understand, I forgot there was a reason why these kinds of crossovers were mildly relevant, because Enterprise, when it came out, it was on this station that was relatively brand new in the United States, which was UPN. And it was the first new station. Okay, so you had the original 3, I think you know which those are, in the United States. And then in the late 80s when Fox came out, that was the first new network since the big 3. And it was just Fox was like the new kid on the block for a long period of time. And of course, Simpsons was like their breakout show almost from the beginning as a network. So then UPN came along. Oh, UPN's first show I think was Voyager. And then later Enterprise. And UPN was the network back then that would show SmackDown. So that probably had something to do with it.
With the science officer as well, I kind of liked the... I guess she's, still used to being on like a human-centric vessel. And I assume she's the only non-human individual on that ship.
No, her and the doctor.
Oh yeah, the doctor, right? The doctor.
Yeah, everyone else is human.
Maybe that's why they bond.
Except for those two.
I assume that we'll probably add more to the roster maybe later on. But I did like how it may sound like elitist almost, novice, but she has these like either smelling salts or neutralizing agents to that she would like stick in her nose or whatever part, kind of like Vicks, I guess, almost to kind of, because she's not used to the human smell. And so I kind of like that. I know that sounds like it's almost inhuman, but I mean, she's from a different culture, so of course she's gonna not be used to it.
Yeah, I don't know that was ever mentioned in Star Trek until now. I mean, here in Enterprise, and to me, it makes sense in the Star Trek universe.
Yeah, I'd assume that on DS9 they probably, because again it's just different cultures on a space station, so they'd all have to just get used to each other's unique smells or odors or whatever have you.
Yeah, and probably by DS9 times, I mean in Star Trek world, you're just used to interacting with all different range of peoples. I imagine like somewhat what it would have been like in a place like London or Paris, you know, historically, like just those places being known as melting pots for a long period of time already. So you wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, what is that person doing with that cloth wrapped around their head? Like you wouldn't be that shocked if you were used to being around metropolitan London or Paris, historically speaking. And I kind of imagine DS9 is kind of that, they're used to is constantly running into different kinds of people. But obviously not at this point in Federation history.
Let's not even get into what happens in Beyond, or the location they're in Beyond.
You mean the planet?
Yeah, planet.
Yeah. I get what you're saying. And of course, never mind. I was going to say, they mentioned Archer and his dog in Star Trek 2009 to Mike Glee at the time. I think Scotty refers to him as Admiral Archer in Star Trek 2009.
I don't recall a dog being in this episode.
No, not in this episode, but he definitely has a beagle.
Oh, okay.
Who you see a lot more. I think the dog's name is Porthos. You usually see Porthos a lot more, but not in this one. Yeah. Anything else you want to say about this episode?
I'll probably kick myself later when I listen to this and say, dang it, I forgot to mention this, but no, I'm good for now.
I will say it's not what. Well, first give me a unit of measure, if you will.
Jade statues. Let's go with Jade statue. Even if it wasn't Jade, yeah.
I was gonna say, one wonders, like, are they importing this from Earth or Terra, as it's often called? Jade statues. I'm gonna give this one, just being honest, and I like Enterprise, generally. I'm gonna give this barely a 3, just because I thought, since I was selecting from a list that who knows who comprised of must-see episodes of Enterprise, that this would be more enjoyable to me or more significant in the grand scheme of things. It is a little bit, in the sense of like how I was saying in the previous episode, we see definite important seeds of Picard's character going forward. And we do get seeds of certain character relations started in this episode. But outside of that, I don't know, it's not that great. And another thing that kind of hurt, in my opinion, the first couple seasons of Enterprise especially, is that they set out right out the gate with the premiere that Vulcans are just generally dicks, especially to humans and others at this time in the Star Trek universe. And that just kind of gets really old, how they're constantly hammering us on the head in the first 2 seasons that Vulcans are dicks. Because for a race that's so logical and supposedly doesn't express emotions, they seem to express a lot of emotion in Star Trek Enterprise, but the same emotion over and over, which is disgust, contempt, and that just seems weird for, the way we understand Vulcans, but it is what it is. And this is just an okay episode to me. There are definitely other episodes of Enterprise I find incredibly more interesting, but it wasn't just outright terrible either. So I'm giving it barely a 3.
Yeah, as a introduction, the first episode to Enterprise, there wasn't much to it for me. I'm stuck between either a 2.5 or a 3. Jade statue.
Rough.
I'll give it a 3. I'll be nice. I'll give it a 3. Not one I'd go back to. I don't know this is only episode 7, so I can't really give. Would it be enough for me to not watch it on stream? No, I think I'd continue to watch just because I'm like, okay, well, this is just a dud episode. I'll just go to the next one and see how that is.
I kind of feel like every Star Trek series is worth watching, even the troubling and flawed Discovery. Now, I wouldn't say anyone should force themselves to watch the entire series Discovery unless they like it. But if you're a fan of Star Trek in general, there are things in Discovery that I think are worthwhile seeing or talking about. But certainly every other series outside of that, including the animated series, all 3 of them, depending on how you count, because you could argue there's more than 3, but anyway, even the animated series, I think, are all worth watching in their own way. But yeah, there we go. Enterprise. It's been a long time. Yeah, stay tuned. I have no idea what is coming next on the feed. I know there's a certain movie we're going to discuss, and actually more than one movie we're going to discuss eventually on this podcast, but one never knows. So, closing out the show today, this is Eric.
And this was Isaac. And until next time,
may the wind be at our backs.
Beware Romulans bearing gifts.
The thing I think that's really worth it on Paramount, besides the Star Trek stuff, is the Yellowstone stuff. And even though it's already in season right now, season 2 of 1923, I need to watch it because I really like those shows, but also because I know they shot a fair amount of scenes on the streets of San Antonio last summer. And I wasn't sure what that was supposed to represent since it takes place in 1923. But even though I haven't watched it yet, I have since learned they used certain streets in San Antonio to stand in for 1923 New York City. And yeah, San Antonio is not often used for New York City in terms of location. So I can't wait to see that stuff. And it was really cool when I know you live in Vancouver where they shoot things all the time, but here it's only now and then that they're shooting something in this city. And it was really cool last summer seeing people's social media posts and seeing like the 1923 set dressings like on the street side and the cars. Man, that looks so cool. So I can't wait to watch that in this actual series.
now hang on. Forgive me for being ignorant, but I thought Texas was a very big filming state. I thought you guys have your whole association and stuff, like Texas Proud or whatever. Or maybe it's just Austin.
It's definitely more Austin.
Okay.
But I mean, and Austin does have a fair amount of productions, but it's not as much as like Georgia and New York City.
No, they're huge. Is Georgia number 2 by now?
It's got to be. I don't know, but it's got to be. And then, of course, New Mexico.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes Chicago, but even Chicago, not that much.
Not as much anymore.
But back in the day, Dallas would be used kind of a lot for things. And before Austin became Austin in the industry, San Antonio would get more used than Austin, like in the 90s and prior.
Remind me, I think RoboCop was filmed in Dallas, correct?
No, I have to look that up. But
Okay.
it looks Midwest City to me. It does not look like Texas at all. But one of the most famous movies that was shot in San Antonio, but people don't know it was shot in San Antonio, was Ace Ventura 2.
Oh, what the heck?
But a lot of it's the jungle scenes that were actually
Get out.
Outside of the city limits, which is weird because we're not known for our forests at all.
At least those kind of forests.
No, any kind of forest. We have trees, but our trees aren't big like East Texas. That are
Just remember, technically, I'm part of a rainforest, but not the Amazon type rainforest.
right. So Ace Ventura, and then a movie that people who know the movie know because it's like Miscongeniality is a very San Antonio movie.
Is that the one with what was it, Sandra Bullock?
Sandra Bullock. Yeah.
I thought that
And
was
I
in
just
New
watched
York.
it for the first time like 3 months ago, and I was like, "Yep, that's San Antonio in the '90s, all right." Knight Rider 2000, the television movie for Knight Rider with David Hasselhoff, very San Antonio filmed. I recognize almost every location in that thing. Yeah, so there's some things. There's some other ones too besides the ones I named.
I completely forgot. I thought Miscongeniality was in New York.
Mm-mm. It's very clearly San Antonio. They say it many times.
I'm dumb.
And you see like certain tourist locations like our infamous river walk, quote unquote. Yeah, that's very much part of the movie. And if we ever get around to it, our sort of anniversary episode of Prognosis Negative with me, Sean, and Chris, who you've never met, I had said we're going to do the movie Cloak and Dagger from like 84 or 85. And I announced that like 9 years ago.
Oh.
And it's going to happen soon. It's going to happen soon. But it's been 9 years in the making.
That's fine. That's fine.
All
You
right,
know
but
what else
quickly,
did not help this episode? What else
what's that?
did not help this episode? And I wept aloud when it happened. Was the freaking theme song?
I know.
I
The
wept aloud.
one of the few things that I actually liked about Enterprise that I thought was unique about Enterprise was the vocal intro. And particularly, I like the theme. I like the original
Are you
theme.
kidding me? Are you kidding me?
No, I'm
Because
serious.
They had
I
the
like
original somber one, and then they had the
Then
new
came
jazz version.
yes, I don't like the easy listening. So when I started this episode and then realized, this is the easy listening version of the theme.
Yeah, I like the
thought that
original.
was-
Yeah, I like the original
why?
too.
Why would they have done that?
God, I was just
Why?
like, he's forcing.
I like
us
the original
to-
too, but I also thought the change up on the DS9 theme was a little bit weird for me too. But anyway,
It's no near as bad as this, and this song is just. I like the intro visuals, but that song.
I
to
know
me
the
is
song
just
what has been and always will be universally hated.
My
but
friend, no, it will not be.
I liked the theme.
I didn't like it out.
don't
I didn't
believe
like
you,
it out the
Carl.
gate,
Shut
but
up.
it grew on me as the show was airing.